Okay, so we're in chapter 8, correct? Verse 40. Okay. Let's see. Chapter 8, verse 40. Okay. Here's something's off with my scripture here. What in the world? Let's see. I think I got it. Maybe figured it out. I'm in Matthew's gospel and not Luke's gospel, so that will definitely do it. Okay, yeah, we're in business now. All right, we're in business now. I'm thinking, I know this is, well, I know Luke. I know every chapter of Luke. And when I was, anyway. So, all right, so picking back up with verse number 40, here I'm recording this for Cliff, putting it in a YouTube link, and Joe's going to have it set up for him to where he can watch it later on, and so that's how much Cliff means to us. And so, anyway, we can all be ourselves. He can deal with that. All right. So verse number 40, chapter number 8. There, Jesus, he had crossed the lake, went to the Gentile region, and there is they invited him to leave, and now he has returned back to Galilee. All right, so verse 40. Jesus returned. A large crowd was waiting for him and welcomed him back. A man named Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, came and fell down at his feet, pleaded with him to come to his house, because he had an only daughter, 12 years old, who was dying. So they set off, and the crowd pressed close in around him. There was a woman who had an internal hemorrhage for 12 years. She had spent all she had on doctors, but had not been able to find a cure for anyone. She came up behind Jesus and touched the hem of his robe. Immediately, her flow of blood dried up. So here now, Jesus, he's going to return. He's dealing with death, and he's dealing with blood. And of course, in Judaism, they're very common. Obviously, there's lifeblood, and so life and death are very much associated with blood. And so this man has this only daughter. I think especially when I read this in the Greek, there's an indication that this daughter is his only child. She's fallen ill. Jesus is going to see about her. And in the meantime, here is this interesting story. This woman has had this issue for 12 years. Jesus is going to go see this girl who is 12 years old, who is dying. And of course, this woman has this issue where she's menstruating endlessly. Now, back to Hebrew purity laws and restrictions. Remember, we often talk about this, the orifices. And of course, when the orifices physical orifices are releasing anything, then, it makes someone impure. When we go to the Levitical code, and when we look in the Levitical code, a woman during her time of menstruation was considered ceremonially unclean. And so during the time of her menstruation, she was very limited in what she could do. It's interesting. I'll throw this in there for free. When we look in the Hebrew law, So a woman, after she gave birth to a child, she was unclean. Why? Something has leaked from the orifices. But incidentally, she's unclean for 1 week if she's had a son, 2 weeks if she's had a daughter. All right. So this woman, everything she touches, according to the law, is unclean. And so normally after a woman was finished menstruating, there would be a ritual bathing, and she'd be all right. This woman was perpetually unclean, 12 years. What are the ramifications of this? We're not certain. On the extreme end, it may be the extreme is not so far. For some of us, we live near the extremes anyway. So on the extreme end, or I can definitely say there was a high degree of persons that believed this woman had to be exiled from community. She's unclean. Everything she touches this table, it's going to be unclean. She touches you, you're going to be unclean. There's no way to clean up. She's just a flow of impurity according to the Levitical law. And so she has to be out of her house, because anything she touches is going to be unclean, out of the community, and just a total exile. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that she lived in her home, but it was just considered socially contaminated. No one had anything to do with her or the home or anything. And by the time we get to the life of Jesus, there was a lot of debate. In fact, it moved past debate between ceremonial and ritual impurity and moral impurity. Because we know that menstruation does not make one morally impure. It's just a purity issue in the Bible. Because we've talked about it, the gateways of the body, the orifices, stood as a surrogate for the social body. And the Hebrews were concerned, what are we expelling from our social body? What are we letting into our social body? So the physical body becomes a surrogate for that. But we know there's nothing morally wrong with these things. However, by the time of Jesus, when we look in the rabbinic writings, there was a lot of people, the majority said, anybody that's ceremonially unclean is also morally unclean. And so, to many, this woman was a perpetual sinner at this point. And so here she comes, and she's supposed to be out of the social scene. She's not supposed to mingle in public, and she certainly is not supposed to touch anybody. And she's going to, these great crowds are pressing in on Jesus. Here she's coming through the crowd. She's no doubt, she's touching people. She's stepping foot on ground, and that becomes impure. Anybody that steps on it's then impure according to the ritual purity. And then she's going to touch Jesus' garment, which then makes the garment unclean, and in turn makes him unclean. I mean, this is a big deal in the world of the Bible. But what occurs here? Jesus, she touches him, and immediately the blood dries up. This 12-year issue, which our narrator points out, hey, she had spent everything she had on doctors. They couldn't help it out. She touches him, immediately she's clean. And what does Jesus do? Verse 45, who touched me? He asked. Everybody denied it. Master, said Peter, the crowds are rushing you and pressing you. Somebody touched me, Jesus. Power went out from me, and I knew it. What does your translation say for power? Virtue or grace? What does it say?
It still says power.
Power?
It says, I know that power has gone out from me.
Oh, that's what everybody's got? Excellent. I know some of the older translations would use virtue or grace or something like that. The word's power. Dunamis is the same word that's translated power everywhere else. Translators didn't translate it as power here. And what's this power? He says, it has gone out from me. Now, what she was doing was impurity was going out from her. Uncleanliness was going out from her. Now something's gone out from Jesus to combat this. And according to the purity laws of the Bible, you've got what's holy and you've got what's profane. And you would think that the holy thing, what was holy, was holier than what was profane. I mean, what was pure could override what was impure, but that wasn't the case. Anything that was impure, when it touched something pure, power was not transferred from the pure object to the impure object. Power was transferred from the impure, the polluted object, to the pure object. So that which was pure now becomes impure. One example of this, of many I could give. The temple, remember, we've talked about this, the geographical compartments of holiness in ancient Israel. Of all the places in the world, Israel's the holiest. But then the tradition says, of all the places in Israel, the walled cities are even holier. Of all the walled cities, Jerusalem is the holiest. Of all the places in Jerusalem, the gates are the holiest. Of all the places within the gates, the Temple Mount is the holiest. Of all the places on the Temple Mount, then the court of the Gentiles is holier. But guess what? Then the court of the women is holier. Then the regular courts, all the way into the Holy of Holies, space was categorized. And as holy as the temple was, the idea there, the Holy of Holies, God rests there, dwells there. I mean, that's pretty holy, right? The temple could be defiled. Samaritans, they were having issues with Jews, and so they decided, we're going to play a trick on them in Jerusalem. We're going to go down to Jerusalem, and we're going to carry bones with us. Bones, anything, a corpse, bones was the highest pedigree of impurity in the Bible. And we're going to go to the temple, and we're going to scatter the bones all around this temple. They did it at a time when it was a festival time. What do? They shut down the temple. They shut the temple down for days. They have to pick up the bones. Then those who have picked up the bones then have to go through cleansing. Then after they have picked up the bones, and gone through the cleansing, then they have to cleanse the temple, wash the temple in entirety, give it a bath. That's a lot of work without a power washer. Okay? Then, what do? After they have cleansed the temple, they've got to go back and then cleanse themselves. Again, that's a process. This is decontamination. This is like a toxic spill or something, just them putting bones. Why? Because the bones had more power, and that was transferable than the temple had. Something's wrong with that, Gail, don't you think? Yeah. If the temple is the resting place of God, shouldn't that be more powerful than the bones? The bones don't hold any power. Come on. But that's the Old Testament. And so, even the holiest place like the temple could be defiled by such a trivial thing in our thinking. And so Jesus, here when he's touched by that woman, he should be contaminated. But she does not transfer to him. He transfers to her. I feel like power has gone out of me. What's happening in the paradigm of Jesus is now purity is working in reverse. Where he's going, he's making pure. When he's walking across real estate as he did, it's purity is being transferred. When he's touching people, purity is being transformed. This is very powerful in the world of the Bible. Jesus isn't going to be made unclean. This is why he could touch the dead body there at Nain. This is why he could touch the leper there. This is why he can do what he does, because nothing's going to transfer onto him. Instead, he's going to transfer it out. And this is such a core and gripping matter of this gospel, as well as Matthew, Mark, and John as well, that Jesus can do this. And so this is how, when we looked at it 2 weeks ago, they said, how is it he eats with tax collectors and sinners? Tax collectors were very unclean. They handled Gentile money. That was impurity escaping. I mean, they did everything wrong. Jesus eats with them. The thinking is the tax collector impurity transfers to Jesus. That was the way they were taught to think. No. Where Jesus is going, he's making pure. So the tax collectors, when they're eating with him, he's distributing purity where he's going. This is going against the grain. And it's interesting in Luke's second volume, Acts, there what occurs is that there, you've heard me talk about that geographical degrees of holiness. Jerusalem's the holiest, the temple. The early church there starts in Jerusalem and at the temple, but Jesus says first in Jerusalem, then in Judea, then Samaria, and to the other ends of the earth. Purity is going to go in the opposite way. Rather than all the focus toward Jerusalem, it's going to start in Jerusalem and it's going to branch out to where at the end of the book of Acts, Luke's second volume, now Paul has gone to Rome. And so even though Jesus wasn't there, what did he do? He sent the Holy Spirit. The Spirit of purity. And so that's what's going on here. Verse 47, when the woman saw that she couldn't remain hidden, she came up trembling and fell down in front of him. She told him in front of everyone why she had touched him and how she had been healed instantly. Daughter, said Jesus, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. She didn't hit an altar, but her faith has saved her. Why? Jesus, purity has been transferred. Calls her daughter. It's very important. It's interesting. He's about to go see a daughter, the daughter of Jairus. Calls her, who was 12 years old. Now he calls this woman who had this infirmity for 12 years, calls her daughter. It's a relational word. We know that. She, in one way or the other, whether she was entirely exiled or largely exiled, what happens to exiles? They're cut off from relationship. That's the nature of exile. Daughters, restoration of relationship. Verse 49, while he was still speaking, someone arrived from the synagogue ruler's house. Your daughter's dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher any longer. Don't be afraid, said Jesus when he heard it. Just believe, and she will be saved. When they got to the house, he didn't let anyone come in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Everyone was weeping and wailing for her. Don't cry, said Jesus. She isn't dead, she's asleep. They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead, but he took her by the hand. Get up, child, he called. Her spirit returned. She got up at once. He told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, amazed, but he told them to tell nobody what happened. So let's get her something to eat. I believe every single chapter in Luke's gospel mentions food. It's the rest of the gospels aren't that way, but I think it's every single chapter mentions food. Why is that? We all understand hunger, but because there's a social significance there. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. When you ate with someone, there was a stamp of approval. The Hebrews just would not eat with anyone. They ate a certain way. Why? Because orifices, what you put into your body. And so when you ate, you guarded what you ate and who you ate with. And here, one reason why there's eating in every chapter here is because what's occurring is there's a restoration from exile. People are getting along again. The doors are open. The table's there. This is one of the significant things about the Passover meal, that the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, as we call it in higher church traditions. I mean, they're symbolized what Jesus was doing there in that meal when he was there with his disciples, the body of Christ broken for you, the blood of Christ shed in your behalf. All right, any questions or comments before we go into chapter number 9?
I think it shows the woman's faith, that she just, how much faith she had.
Yeah.
Just knowing that all she had to do was touch the hem of his garment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Gail.
So why did he specifically say not to tell anybody what happened?
Okay. I think I can tell you. We're going to see it in chapter number 9 coming up. But I'll go ahead and give you the segue. All right. So you might recall the question of Jesus' identity is a literary motif. It's his identity in Luke chapter 2. Well, Luke chapter 1 is about revealing his identity by way of angelic announcement. Then Luke chapter 2, it's like, your father and I have been looking for you. Hey, I'm about my father's business. There's a redirect there. You've got to understand who his father is. It's not this guy, it's this guy. Then in Luke chapter 3, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. Or sonship is affirmed. But then in Luke chapter 4, the devil says, if you are the Son, then do this. If you are the Son of God, there's a challenge of identity. Then what happens is, then the next thing in Luke 4, Jesus goes into Nazareth. What do they say? Is this not Joseph's son? It's a question of identity. Then he goes to Capernaum, to the synagogue. They say, we know who you, the dark spiritual forces, the impure spirit, the demons, says, we know who you are, Son of God. And he says, go tell nobody. Why? Because it's an unfolding mystery, and it continues to unfold until chapter number 9. I presented on this at a conference a couple years ago, so that's how I know. All right, so we're ready to go in chapter number 9. All right, Jesus called together the 12, gave them power. Okay, power. We've already seen what power can do. It's and among other things, it's purity being rechanneled now. Now this is real power, purity. The purity overrides the unclean. This is new stuff. Okay. And authority over all demons and to cure diseases. Well, yeah, if you've got that kind of power, if you override the unclean, then there's nothing that you can't do. He sent them out to announce God's kingdom and cure the sick. Don't take anything for your journey, he said. No stick, no bag, no bread, no money, no second cloak. Okay, it's don't pack very light. Whenever you go to a house, stay there and leave from there. If anyone won't receive you, go out of that town and wipe the dust off your feet as evidence against them. So they went and traveled through the villages, announcing the good news and healing people everywhere. All right. I can throw in this here. When Jesus says, whenever you go into a house, stay there and leave from there. And then he says, if you're not received in a town, then wipe the dust as evidence. So if they're staying in a house, then they have been received in that town. But if a town receives his disciples, then they are honored guests. And in the world of antiquity, what would often occur is you have a guest that comes in, and they would many times circulate around homes. Why? Because every home that they went into, that household was obligated to throw them a banquet. I'm convinced this is what Jesus is trying to avoid. You're not going to go into a town and go into every home and have them throw you a banquet because you've done healed their people. That's not what the disciples are going to do. Go stay in one home, They'll throw you the one banquet when you are first there, and then they'll treat you with hospitality after that, but you're not going to go through and fleece this entire village as some sort of compensation for curing their diseases. That's what I'm convinced of. So, Herod the Tetrarch heard what was going on and was very puzzled. All right, here we go on. Some people were saying John's being raised from the dead. Question of identity. Others were saying Elijah has appeared. Question of identity. Still others were saying one of the old prophets had risen. We're still questioning Jesus' identity. They're not getting it yet. Even Herod now is wondering. This is important. We talked about this several weeks ago when I gave my thesis that Jesus' ministry my thesis is Jesus' ministry lasted less than 6 months. I said John's probably between a harvest and planting season. And Jesus' ministry lasted longer than John's, but not much longer. And what was John had a political message. That's why he did not last long. The reason why Jesus speaks in parables is because he's cryptic, concealing some of that political message. That's why he's not to confuse people, but just to keep it a little bit under wraps. Why his mobility there. John was easy to get because he was stationary along the Jordan. Jesus traveling around makes it harder for him to catch. Jesus has a political message. Is what we've looked at it over the course of weeks. This is why Herod is getting puzzled. And everyone's trying to figure out this identity. Verse number 9, Herod says, I beheaded John, but I keep hearing all these things about this fellow. Who is he? And he tried to get to see him. Who is he? Doesn't everybody want to know? The apostles returned and told Jesus what they had done. He took them off and went away privately to a town called Bethsaida. They've gone private now. Why? Historically speaking, I'll speak as here, Herod's looking for him. Herod's looking for him. Let's get away for a minute, okay? Herod's looking for us. Verse 11, when the crowds found out, they followed him, though. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God. And he healed those who needed it. Wait. I thought Herod was a king. And what's Jesus going to do? He's talking about the kingdom of God. It's a political message. As the day wore on, the 12 came to Jesus. Send the crowd away, they said, so that they can go into the villages and countryside nearby, find somewhere to stay and get something to eat. We're in a desolate spot here. You give them something to eat, he replied. All we've got here, they said, is 5 loaves and a couple of fish. Unless you mean we should go ourselves and buy food for all these people. There were about 5,000 men. Get them to sit down, Jesus said, in groups of around 50 each. They did so. Everyone sat down. Then Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish. He looked up to heaven, blessed the food, divided it, gave it to his disciples to pass around the crowd. He took it. He divided it. He broke it. My translation here is a wonderful translation, but I think it should say he broke it. It's sacramental language. This is the language of the Last Supper. He took it and he broke it. He blessed it. He looked up, blessed it. Anyway, verse 17. Everyone ate and was satisfied. What did I just tell you? We've got eating in every chapter. They took up 12 baskets of broken pieces left over. Okay, so what's Jesus done now? He has fed the people. And there's actually some left over. This is Jesus' politics right here. You've heard me talk about how the economy functioned in the first century world here. Little to no excess. 90% of the people lived right at subsistence, paycheck to paycheck. Or worse, okay? They were going bankrupt. The few that had excess, there was about 7% that had just a little bit of breathing room. And then there were the 3% or so, like Herod, and Rome, who stored up and accumulated and stockpiled what everybody else worked for, and left the majority peasant populace hungry. They grew it. He took it. And here's Jesus' program. He's distributing it. He's multiplying it. In fact, there's excess. Some is left over here. Everybody's had enough. People ate till they were full. You in that world, seldom did they ever really eat until they were really full. Even there's sociologists have done studies on impoverished peasant classes, even in modernity. And what occurs is you become so used to having so little to nothing that even when you have excess, you're gonna save it. Think about the generation from the Great Depression, generation of my grandparents and most of your parents. Saving as much as they could. Here, Jesus here is giving them more than enough. All right, so when Jesus was praying alone, his disciples gathered around him. Okay, here's the big spiel now. Who do the crowd say I am? He asked them. Here we're getting to it. This is the big climax of this motif here with this question of identity. Now Jesus is going to decide it's time to be settled, Shirley. All right, no longer is it going to, it's time to be settled. John the Baptist, they responded. And others say Elijah. Others say that the ancient prophets has risen. What about you, said Jesus? Who do you say I am? God's Messiah, God's Christ, answered Peter. He gave them strict and careful instructions not to tell this to anyone. So, the identity now is revealed to a certain audience, to a precise audience. And that's where this motif ends, over Jesus' identity. So now it's done been declared. Somebody's finally said some human has said he's the Christ, Messiah, the anointed one. We think of Christ, Messiah, in these terms because we have 2,000 years of Christianity underneath our belt. And so we think, well, what is Messiah? He came to die for sins. Okay? If you went to first century Galilee and you said, what is Christ? What is Messiah? They said, well, there's a precedent. Somebody was called Messiah before, anointed. David and the Old Testament. Kings were anointed. That's just simply what the word, the Greek Christos, or Messiah there in the Hebrew means, the anointed one. Throughout the first century before Jesus, there were many saying that they were the Messiah. They were the anointed one. Just like when we get into Luke 17, Jesus is going to say, don't be deceived by those where they say, look, here's the Messiah, there's the Messiah, but we'll get there later. In the first century, they would say, I'm the Messiah, and people would say, yeah, you are. And what would they do? Try to lead a movement against the powers, against Rome, and things of that nature. That was their thinking of what it meant to be Christ's Messiah. So Jesus said, don't tell anybody this. Why? Because we've got more work to do before Herod comes after us. What's that work going to be? We're about to find it out. All right. The Son of Man, he said, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and legal experts. He must be killed and raised up on the third day. All right. Well, he's got to suffer things. So that's one key. We don't want to get arrested by Herod yet. He's got to suffer. He's going to continue to tell us more. He then spoke to them all. If any of you want to come after me, he said, you must say no to yourselves. Pick up your cross every day and follow me. Again, we have 2,000 years of Christianity under our belt. So a cross is a very sacred symbol. You've got one in the sanctuary. You've got one, a necklace. You've got one in images of it in your home. All this is such a sacred thing. The cross in the world of the Bible, there was nothing sacred about it. That the cross was a symbol of humiliation. It was the symbol of Rome's power. Let me tell you about Jewish history with the cross. When the Romans came in, and the people had tried to these false messiahs had tried to rise up against Rome in the past. Rome says, we're going to put you in your place. What better way to put you in their place than they had for 20 miles on a primary road outside of Jerusalem, crosses with would-be Jewish freedom fighters hanging on them all. The bodies stayed on these crosses for days, weeks, maybe even months. So anyone that was traveling was going to see, you want to take up armaments against Rome, this is what you have to look forward to. That's what the cross was used for, as a tool of humiliation against would-be insurrectionists. So, Jesus says, take up your cross. Okay. This is like the preacher saying, come with me to the electric chair, to the lethal injection chamber. Come pick it up with me. In fact, make an image of it and wear it around your neck. Put the image of it there on your church altar. Yeah, that's this imagery. I mean, it's nobody used it for anything sacred other than Christianity. In fact, the early church, we read that outside of the Bible, the early church wrestled with the symbology of the cross. Because understandably, some said, this is such a negative symbol, we don't really think that this should be what we end up using as our primary symbol. This was contested in early church history. And so this is what Jesus is saying is very, very awkward. Yeah, prepare to become a revolutionary and prepare to die like a revolutionary as well. If you want to save your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life because of me, you'll save it. Well, why did they want to rise up against Rome? A lot, you know, the political reasons. You know, why did we have our Declaration of Independence on our July 4th? I mean, we know the reasons. But there was another reason. Gentiles were unclean. And they're walking all over your land. When they're giving you the currency that you have to return, pay them in taxation and all these kinds of things. When they put their emblems on your temple and everywhere around. When they build cities in their style there in your sacred places. When they put up a fort, the Antonia Fortress sitting on the Temple Mount housed Roman soldiers right beside the temple. It's unclean, it's impure. And with the Rome, impurity was spreading. Of course, Jesus, his followers realized, no, impurity is starting to work differently going forward. But that was their thinking of why they wanted to rise up. Jesus is going to have different issues as we'll see. But all right, verse 25. What good will it do for you if you win the entire world but lose or forfeit your own self? Who wants to win the entire world? Well, Rome did. And then what did the Hebrews want to do? They called their space the world. They wanted to rise up and win it back. What good is it for you to rise up and do this if you're going to end up losing your own self? If you're ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of you when he comes in the glory which belongs to him, to the Father, and to the holy angels. When he's saying shamed here, it's not referring to being, I don't want to admit that I'm a Christian. That's not what Jesus was precisely talking about. We can take that from it, but this is what it is in context. You've heard me say the word of the Bible was what? Honor, shame, culture. You did what was honorable, or you did what was shameful. And if any of you feel like that following me is anything but honorable, if you feel like it's shameful, then you've got no part of it. You have to be sold out to this. You're going to have to see honor in a different way. After all, what was one of the hallmark parables Jesus has already told? The first parable he told, this is new wine going in new wineskins. Think differently. It's all changing. Let me tell you, he concluded, there are some standing here who won't experience death until they see God's kingdom. I'll remind you of that later. All right. About 8 days after this conversation, Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up a mountain to pray. And he was praying, and the appearance of his face changed. His clothes became shining white. All right, let's go back. There's imagery here that is forming. In the book of Exodus, there, Moses, what does he do? He goes up onto a mountain. And he's going to bring down the law. And if you remember from Exodus, what occurs? Moses' face was shining to where the people said, get away from us. We can't stand to look at you. There's Moses' imagery here. It's not that I'm so smart. Read verse 30. 2 men appeared talking with him. It was Moses and it was Elijah, who appeared in glory, who were speaking of his departure, which he was going to fulfill in Jerusalem. What words do you have instead of departure? I'm sorry, Ann? Accomplish. This word here in the Greek is hepax logama in the New Testament. You know what that means? It only appears one time here, and the word is exodus.
It said, who appeared in glory and spake of his decease, which he should accomplish at correction. That's what King James read.
Gotcha. The word for departure here is exodus. Now you don't have to be that brilliant in etymology to realize Exodus is what we call the second book of the Bible. Exodus. He was going to accomplish an exodus there. He's already shining, looking like Moses. He's talking to Moses. He's talking with Elijah. What did Elijah do? He did an exodus of his own, if you go back to Kings. Anyway, there's an exodus happening here, but this, and everybody was looking for an exodus. Remember, we're talking politics here. What was the first exodus? There is a Pharaoh, Exodus 1. He's working them harder. He's working them harder. He's working them harder. He's taking from their work and leaving them poor while he's building up his own kingdom. That mirrors and reflects precisely what was occurring with Herod and Rome, who he answered to. And so, and they exited Egypt to become free. And so everyone wants to have a new exodus, become free once again. And Jesus' exodus here is going to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. So this is why he cannot let them go out and tell everyone I'm Christ. He's not going to be revealed to Herod yet. Why? Because he's still in Galilee and he's got to get to Jerusalem. That is going to be the big deal. So let's keep quiet till we get to Jerusalem. This is chapter 9. He doesn't get there till chapter 19. So you know what this means? 10 out of 24 chapters in Luke here represent this travel to Jerusalem. That's the meat of the sandwich, as I call it. The pieces of bread are the first 9, or the chapters 1 through 8. The other piece of bread is chapters 20 through 24. The meat, the central section, is this, 9 through 19. And so this narrative of Jerusalem is going to be very important. But what was the hallmark of the first Exodus? Yes, it was political. But if you remember what God told Moses, he says, go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And then we forget about the rest. So that they can worship me in the wilderness. Worship was a critical goal. And he's going to make this exodus in Jerusalem. What is Jerusalem the capital of, if not worship? But, and so it was, yet there's something wrong with their view of worship. Why? Because they have a temple. If you scatter a bone there, they've got to shut it down and wash it. Jesus has a temple in his body to where he transfers purity. Jesus is the new temple. And it's no coincidence, the very first thing when Jesus gets to Jerusalem in Luke 19, the very first thing when he arrives, he goes into the temple. And he quotes from Jeremiah 7 and Isaiah 56, "My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you turn it into a den of thieves." Not to get too far ahead, but what's a den? What's a den? A den isn't where thieves go to rob. A den is their safe house. The temple had become a safe house. Ooh. Now you're going to have to wait till we get to chapter 19 then. All right, so all right, where were we? All right, verse 32, right? Yeah. Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, but they managed to stay awake. They saw his glory and the two men who were standing with him. As they were going away from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let us make 3 tents. Let's make 3 tabernacles." All right. Where did the tabernacle come from? Exodus. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. He didn't know what he was saying. But as the words were coming out of his mouth, I'll add in so ignorantly, a cloud appeared and overshadowed them. Again, this is Exodus imagery. There, Moses goes up to the mount. There, a cloud overshadowed it. They were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came from the cloud. "This is my son." That whole question of identity and sonship, it stops here. "This is my son. Listen to him." As the voice spoke, there was Jesus by himself. They kept silent and told nobody at the time anything that they had seen. Why? Because they've got to go to Jerusalem. Can't talk about this because we're not going to be able to make it to Jerusalem if we do. Let's keep quiet. That way we can go to Jerusalem. The next day, as they were going down from the mountain, a large crowd met them. A man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, please have a look at my son. He's my only child, and look at what's happening to him." A spirit seizes him and suddenly shrieks it and convulses him so that he foams at the mouth. It goes on savaging him. It's almost impossible to get it to leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. It's been tried before, but it's failed. Ask your disciples to do this. They couldn't do it. But what Jesus is now preparing to do, this miracle, it comes in great literary form here. Because what we see demonstrated is the inadequacy of previous attempts. Whether it be previous attempts of reform, whether it be previous attempts of rebuke, or whether it be, or whatever political design that had come by those that were previously called Christ, that they were all inadequate. Here, I think that imagery is expressed in this miracle that he's about to do. That they come, this child, his only son. Remember, you don't have to have me go in the background of sonship in the world of antiquity. This is my only son. I've been trying to get help, but they couldn't. "You faithless and depraved generation," said Jesus, "how long shall I be with you and have to put up with you? Bring your son here." Remember, he targets the generation. Why does he target the generation? Because this isn't as we read this deeper, it's not about this boy and his disciples who failed. It's about a generation that has failed. A generation that could not change anything for the better. While he was on his way, the demon tore at him and threw him into convulsions. Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the child, and gave him back to his father. Everyone was. The mighty power of God, yes. And while they were all still expressing amazement at everything he'd done, Jesus said this to the disciples, "Let these words go right down into your ears. The Son of Man is to be given over into human hands." They had no idea what he was talking about. It was hidden from them so that they wouldn't perceive it. And they were afraid to ask him about it. They realize now, here's what we realize in this chapter. It's about to get for real. We've done seen the phase 1, and now we're going into the phase 2. It's about to get real. They realize that. We don't know what he means, Joyce, but we don't want to ask. All right. And then we can go a little bit further. A dispute rose among them about which one is the greatest. Oh, goodness. This is an honor-shame world. It's who's got the most honor. Jesus knew this quarrel was going on in his heart, so he took a child and stood it beside him. "If you receive this child in my name," he says, "and anyone who receives me receives the one who sent me. Whoever is least among you, that's the one who is great." Okay. This is new wine. Remember, we saw this is status reversal. We saw it with Mary's Magnificat in Luke 1, giving a quality introduction to this whole gospel. Down from the thrones he hurled the rulers. Up he propelled the humble. And we've seen it over and over. We saw it in the Sermon on the Plain. Blessed are the hungry. Cursed are those who are full. Blessed are those who mourn. Cursed are those who laugh. There's going to be a reversal, Jesus says. Remember, we've said this time and again that in this, and especially in Luke's theology, you don't want to be one of the greatest. You don't want to fight and argue over who's got highest honor, because it's all going to reverse. Here he says, look at this child. You receive him, and you receive him, even though the idea here is this. Because you've heard me say that 50% of the population did not survive past the age of 5. Then another considerable portion did not survive to the age of 13, adulthood. And so what happens? We invest, and then when you're trying to have as many children as you possibly can, the children socially become commodities. That's a reality of the ancient world. It's just a reality. Sure, there was love, but it was a different paradigm. And what occurs is this: because you bury multiple children in the course of a lifetime, likely, your relationship is formed differently with your children. I told you this when we were in Luke 2, that the father didn't even do anything with the son really until he was 12 years old, 1 year from becoming a man, because then he was worth investing in. And so children, didn't have the virtue that they do in our world. But we hopefully try to really invest ourselves totally, wholeheartedly in our children. It's very different. A child just stays out of the way. There's, remember, in the Hebrew thinking, there's categories and distinctions. There's children's space, there's women's space, there's men's space. Children stay out of adult space. And here Jesus uses this example. Hey, look at this child. Receive him as you receive me. "Master," verse 49, commented John, "we saw someone casting out demons in your name. We told him to stop because he wasn't part of us. He wasn't in our denomination." "Don't stop him," replied Jesus. "Anyone who isn't against you is on your side." As the time came near for Jesus to be taken up, again, he settled it in his mind to go to Jerusalem. He sent messengers ahead of him. They came into a Samaritan village to get them ready, and they refused to receive him because his mind was set on going to Jerusalem. "Luke, how many times are you going to remind us?" He said, "I'm going to Jerusalem." Well, Now, he's getting it really entrenched in us. The direction has changed. We're going from Galilee to Jerusalem, and this is very important now. It's why he keeps reminding us. And so he's going to go to Samaria. But they know he's going to Jerusalem. And remember, those are the ones that polluted the temple. It'll be interesting when we get to the Good Samaritan next week. Anyway, they polluted the temple. They didn't like it because Jesus was going to Jerusalem. Verse 54, when the disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Master, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and burn them up? He turned and rebuked them, and they went into another village. As they were going along the road, a man addressed Jesus. Wherever you're going, he said, I'll follow you. Foxes have lairs, Jesus said, and birds in the sky have nests, but the Son of Man doesn't have anywhere to lay his head. A fox was a symbol used for Herod. Birds was a symbol. The Roman eagle was used for Rome. I think this is very cryptic language. Well, it's not that cryptic. It's cryptic to us, but it is disguised subversive language here. Hey, foxes have their lairs. Herod's got his. Rome's got theirs. You want to follow me and not them? I don't have anywhere to lay my head. It's not that Jesus, couldn't find somewhere to lay down. This is imagery here. To another person he said, follow me. Master, he replied, let me first go bury my father. Let the dead bury their dead, said Jesus. You must go and announce God's kingdom. I will follow you, Master, said another. But first let me say goodbye to the people at home. Nobody, replied Jesus, who begins to plow and then looks over his shoulder is fit for God's kingdom. There's some hyperbole occurring here. No doubt. It's obviously this takes direction, changes direction here in chapter 9. We're going forward. Jesus is saying. Don't turn around when you're plowing. Don't turn around. You can't plow backwards. Don't worry about burying the dead. This is hyperbole here. I'm going to Jerusalem. If you're going to come with me, you're going to have to move beyond whatever it is you've got, and in order to go. All right. Well, I'll pause here. It's the end of the chapter, and it's also 7:30 on the dot, and so I suppose that aligns so well just to let me know, just stop as much as I want to start into chapter number 10. Looking